One of the contributing factors to Dublin's housing crisis is the difficulty in building new housing within the city. In recent years, housing developments across Dublin have been blocked by local residents citing concerns about the development's impact on their area. The phrase "not in my backyard" or NIMBY has rightly or wrongly come to describe this pattern of local objections, and so-called NIMBYism is not unique to Ireland, with cities like San Francisco, London, Sydney and Auckland beset by difficulties in building new housing. A common strategy used by objectors is to find some form of wildlife that would be impacted by development and to co-opt local politicians to oppose the plans. A good example can be seen in Raheny on Dublin's north side, where planning for 580 apartments, a cinema and nursing home was recently refused. The proposed site is close to St Anne's Park, but not in the park itself. Nevertheless, a campaign mobilised a large section of the local population to stop development. The official reason given for the refusal was the potential impact on Brent geese, who seasonally migrate from Canada. While these geese are not endangered, local politicians sided with the objectors, with one government TD saying, "Of particular concern is the impact this proposed development will have on the light-bellied Brent goose." Across the river on Dublin's south side, residents and politicians successfully stopped the development for 172 apartments, referring to it as a 9-story skyscraper on a hilltop that is in the flight path of many of our wild birds, including Brent geese. Some people take issue with the term NIMBY, deeming it pejorative and oversimplistic. If you were living on this quiet street and plans were announced to build this high-density housing nearby, you might find yourself suddenly taking an interest in the welfare of Brent geese. Perhaps there's a NIMBY in all of us. At its root, NIMBYism is an issue of distributed benefits and concentrated costs. More housing is good for wider society, the benefits of which are widely distributed, but the costs of the new housing, traffic, noise and changing streetscapes are concentrated in one area. Homeowners will often agree in principle with the need for new housing, they just don't want it near them. And this puts politicians in a tricky spot. National policy promotes densification within urban areas in order to reduce urban sprawl and its resulting environmental footprint. So on this basis, it's hard to justify blocking development. But politicians need votes, and since existing residents can vote while potential new residents haven't moved in yet, the politicians' incentives are to side with the existing residents. Another problem in Ireland is that objections don't just come from those living next door or on the same street. Anybody in your town, county, or the other end of the country can object to a development. And while most of us can imagine a scenario in which we might say, "not in my backyard," it's harder to sympathise with those saying, "not in anyone's backyard." Of course, objections aren't the only issue with Ireland's property market. The rising cost of building materials, taxation, strict planning and building regulations, and a lack of investment in public housing have all played a role. But objections remain a fundamental obstacle to construction in Ireland, no matter who's doing the building. The big picture is that Ireland's housing crisis is beginning to undermine the country's economic model, which fuses American capital with European labour on Irish land. And while capital and workers continue to flow into the country, the land is proving hostile to development. As a result, the housing stock simply hasn't kept up with demand, pushing rents and house prices out of the reach of many, especially those not working in the lucrative tech sector. So if it's generally accepted that we need more housing, and that far-flung objections are preventing that, what can be done? One measure would be to have a referendum in each local authority area to decide the planning rules on who gets to object to what and on what grounds. A direct vote would bring these issues out into the open, and having the votes locally as opposed to nationally would allow different areas to experiment with different policies and learn by doing. Another concept, YIMBYism, or Yes in My Backyard, is a movement that has been gathering momentum internationally in recent years and involves something called street votes. The idea behind street votes is that residents of a lower density area can hold a vote on whether to upzone their neighbourhood to allow for higher density, and if a certain threshold agrees, permission is sought from the local council to proceed. The rationale is that homeowners would benefit financially from being able to build upwards. Society would benefit from the increased housing supply, and policymakers would be credited with alleviating the housing shortage. Hence, street votes represents a rare case of a win-win-win, at least in theory. Street votes is still a relatively new idea, and Ireland doesn't have a legal mechanism to allow for such initiatives at present. But the general principle of turning residents from blockers into backers is worth exploring, since residents are more likely to support development if they will benefit themselves. For the purposes of exploring the idea of street votes, we looked at an area in Dublin consisting of low-density housing. We used architectural modelling software to visualise what this neighbourhood looks like now, and what it would look like if a street votes type densification were to take place, with gentle density of 4 to 6 stories, as well as aesthetic touches such as trees, street lamps, and textured parking bays. We are a new channel that explores solutions to some of society's most pressing problems, with housing top of the list. So please, subscribe if you'd like to see more from us, and check out our next video on street votes to see how we densified this area. We'd also be interested in your comments on the subjects of NIMBYism, YIMBYism, and housing more generally. Slán go fóill.